Tonight, we're stepping back in time, way back to the sun-drenched, marble-columned world of ancient Greece. Imagine, for a moment, that you've just arrived in the bustling agora of Athens. The smell of olives and sweat mingling with the distant shouts of merchants. The vibrant hues of painted pottery catch your eye, and the murmur of philosophical debate drifts from a nearby stoa. You see citizens in their elegant chiton discussing politics, trade, and the nature of beauty. But as your gaze sweeps past the grand temples and the imposing figures of statesmen, you notice something else. A subtler stratum of society, woven into the very fabric of this grand civilization, yet largely hidden from its celebrated narratives. Tonight, we're going to gently explore one of the less glamorous, often heartbreaking, corners of that ancient world. What life was truly like for a male concubine in ancient Greece. It's a reality far removed from the idealized images of philosophers and warriors, a side of daily life that often gets overlooked in the scrolls of history. You might encounter an old man arguing passionately about ethics, totally oblivious to the silent, watchful young figure at his side, who, by the end of our journey tonight, you'll understand far better. You probably won't survive a day here, with your modern sensibilities intact, let alone in the shoes of someone so vulnerable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, let me know where in the world you are and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself observing the complex social hierarchy, where citizenship is paramount and freedom is a prized possession. The air hums with intellectual curiosity, but also with unspoken rules and power dynamics. It's a key historical understanding that while grand philosophical ideas blossomed, so did practices that seem utterly foreign and even disturbing to us today. You might notice, for instance, a wealthy Athenian citizen strolling through the market, perhaps with a younger, exceptionally beautiful man accompanying him, not as an equal, but with a subtle deference that hints at their unequal standing. This isn't a typical master-slave dynamic, nor is it a publicly acknowledged partnership. It exists in a peculiar, ill-defined space. A curious detail you might miss at first glance is the way these relationships were often seen as a status symbol, a quiet display of wealth and influence for the patron, much like owning a fine piece of art or a well-bred horse. Historians still argue whether the subtle power plays in these relationships were ever truly reciprocal, or if the veneer of mentorship merely masked a deeper form of exploitation. You're beginning to see that the celebrated ideals of ancient Greece sometimes had a darker, more complex underbelly. As you wander through the winding streets, the sounds of daily life wash over you. The rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant bleating of goats, the chatter of women at the public fountain. Imagine for a moment the contrast between the grand philosophical discourses you might overhear and the quiet, almost invisible struggles unfolding behind the walls of private homes. You might catch a glimpse of a young man, dressed simply, carrying a basket of goods into a large, imposing villa. His eyes seem to hold a story, a subtle weariness that belie his youth. This isn't the romanticized image of ancient Greece you often see on pottery or in plays. This is a place where social roles are rigidly defined and opportunities are scarce for those outside the privileged few. The concept of freedom here is not universal. It's a carefully guarded privilege, often dependent on birthright, wealth, or specific legal statuses. Consider the notion of love and desire in this ancient setting. While poetry and myths celebrated passionate romances, the reality for many was far more transactional. You might ponder how different their understanding of relationships was, lacking the modern emphasis on mutual consent and emotional equality. The very air seems to hum with unspoken expectations and hidden arrangements. It's a society built on a delicate balance of honor, reputation, and strict social codes. You'll soon discover that what was considered acceptable behind closed doors could be vastly different from what was openly acknowledged in the public square. The sun begins to dip lower, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, and you feel the weight of this historical reality settling in. The gentle hum of the evening cicadas provides a calming backdrop, even as the gravity of the subject begins to unfold. You might also notice the sheer density of life. Every alleyway seems to bustle with activity. Children chase each other, their laughter echoing off stone walls. Vendors hawk their wares, their voices a melodic drone. The scents are myriad: sweet figs, pungent olives, the earthy aroma of freshly baked bread. Even amidst this vibrant tapestry, your focus is drawn to the more subtle cues of status and power. The way some people walk with an air of unquestioned authority, their heads held high, their gaze direct, contrasting sharply with those who move with a more deferential posture, their eyes downcast. You observe the easy camaraderie among groups of men who appear to be peers, their discussions animated and their gestures uninhibited. Then your gaze might fall upon another young figure, perhaps standing quietly near a shop entrance, his demeanor echoing your own subtle unease. These are the individuals who exist on the fringes, not quite part of the recognized social order, yet inextricably linked to it. The city hums with life, but for some, that hum is a constant reminder of their place, a quiet whisper of their limited world. As the sun begins its slow ascent over the ancient city, painting the marble with hues of rose and gold, your journey truly begins. You're not merely an observer now, you are experiencing, through the lens of history, what it meant to be a male concubine in this world. This position, you quickly realize, was not about mutual affection or a recognized partnership in the way we understand relationships today. Instead, it was deeply rooted in the social stratification of ancient Greece, a society obsessed with status, citizenship, and freedom. It's a key historical understanding that while citizens enjoyed a certain level of autonomy, many others were not so fortunate. Slaves, of course, occupied the lowest rung, considered property rather than people. But male concubines existed in a murky, often contradictory space somewhere above outright slavery, yet far, far below the esteemed status of a free man. Curious detail about this era is that while the concept of pederasty existed, a mentorship relationship between an older man, the Eraseds, and a younger boy, the Eraminos, that sometimes included sexual intimacy. It was often idealized in philosophical texts as a means of education and character development. However, the reality of male concubinage, as you're experiencing it, rarely lived up to that lofty ideal. These were not typically relationships of intellectual equals or revered mentorship. Instead, concubines were primarily kept for sexual gratification and as symbols of their patron's wealth and power. Historians still argue whether any true affection or genuine care could flourish within such an inherently unequal power dynamic, or if the concubine's emotional well-being was simply an afterthought. You might feel a flicker of cynicism. Observing the hypocrisy, you might find yourself wondering about the legal standing of such individuals. Were they slaves? Were they free? The answer is frustratingly fluid and depended heavily on individual circumstances. Most male concubines were either slaves specifically acquired for this purpose, or freeborn but impoverished young men sold or forced into the role due to desperate economic circumstances. For a slave concubine, your body and your time belonged entirely to your owner. You had no rights, no recourse, and no hope of legal protection. For a freeborn male forced into concubinage, the situation was marginally different, perhaps allowing for a theoretical, though rarely actionable, claim to freedom. However, the pervasive economic dependence and social stigma meant that even a freeborn concubine lived a life of profound vulnerability. Imagine, for a moment, the psychological toll. You are an object, valued for your youth and beauty, perhaps, for your ability to entertain, but rarely for your mind or your spirit. Your days are dictated by the whims of your patron. You might be summoned at any hour, day or night, to attend to his needs. This could involve serving him food and drink, providing musical entertainment, or simply being present for his sexual gratification. There's a constant pressure to anticipate his desires, to maintain a calm and agreeable demeanor, regardless of your internal turmoil. You learn to read the subtle shifts in his mood, the slight tightening of his jaw, the glint in his eye, all clues to what he expects of you next. Your survival, in a very real sense, depends on your ability to remain pliable and obedient. The air might be thick with the aroma of roasted meats and fine wine, but for you, it's just another evening of performance and submission. There's a quiet dread that permeates your existence, a constant awareness of your precarious position. You walk a fine line, needing to please your patron to ensure your continued, albeit miserable, existence, while simultaneously enduring the indignities that come with the role. The gentle evening breeze might bring a temporary respite from the heat, but it does little to alleviate the internal chill of your reality. You become an expert in the art of quiet observation. You notice the subtle interactions between family members, the unspoken commands between master and slave, the casual assumptions of superiority from citizens. You learn to interpret the silences, the glances, the slight shifts in posture that signal approval or displeasure. This skill is born not of curiosity, but of necessity. Your very well-being depends on your ability to accurately gauge the moods of those around you, particularly your patron. You might spend hours in a single room, a silent witness to debates on democracy or discussions about military campaigns, absorbing fragments of knowledge you are not meant to wield. The sounds of distant laughter from the street, perhaps from free men enjoying a stroll, highlight the boundary of your existence. You are, inside, always watching, always serving, a silent part of the opulent machinery, yet fundamentally disconnected from the free will and agency that powers it. The shadows lengthen, bringing with them a sense of quiet resignation, a familiar companion in your constrained life. The morning sun now fully illuminates the city, highlighting the stark contrasts within its seemingly idyllic facade. You've settled into the rhythm of this peculiar existence, and one thing becomes glaringly clear. Your status, or rather your lack thereof, defines every waking moment. The phrase male concubine might sound exotic to modern ears, but in ancient Greece, for many, it simply translated to catamite, a term often applied to young boys and men who served as passive sexual partners. These individuals were frequently acquired through various means. Some were war captives, others were children sold by impoverished families, and a few, though likely rare for those truly enslaved, might have been free-born individuals driven by destitution. This complex origin story for such individuals means that their starting point in this unenviable role could vary, yet the ultimate outcome was remarkably similar in its limitations and hardships. A curious detail about the term catamite is its linguistic origin, deriving from the Latin catamitus, which itself was a romanization of the Greek name Ganymede. Remember Ganymede from the myths, the beautiful Trojan prince abducted by Zeus to be his cupbearer on Olympus. While the myth might sound romantic, often depicting an almost idyllic servitude, the reality for human catamites was anything but divine. They were far from revered. Historians still argue whether the use of such a mythical, almost divine association served to soften the harsh reality of their exploitation or simply highlighted the absolute power dynamic at play, implying a natural order to their submission. You can almost feel the uncomfortable irony of it all. A beautiful name masking a painful truth. Your early life, if you were to embody this role, would likely have been one marked by profound loss and a sudden, brutal transition. Perhaps you remember the warmth of a simple home, the laughter of siblings, or the comforting scent of your mother's cooking. All of that is gone now, replaced by the sterile opulence, or sometimes the stark utility of your patron's household. You were, in essence, chosen. Not chosen for your intellect or your bravery, but for your youth, your appearance, and your perceived pliancy. This selection was rarely, if ever, a matter of consent. It was a transaction, a capture, or a desperate surrender. Imagine the crushing weight of that realization. Your very being, your future, dictated by someone else's desires, with no say in the matter, no appeal, and no escape. You're meticulously taught specific behaviors that define your new existence. How to serve with quiet efficiency, how to please without overt displays of emotion, how to be silent and unobtrusive when not explicitly called upon. Your movements become economical, almost graceful in their learned deference, your expressions muted, a careful mask. You learn to anticipate needs before they are even voiced, a skill born of constant observation and the urgent need to avoid displeasure. There's a quiet desperation that permeates your learned compliance, an unspoken plea for peaceful existence within your confines. The opulent frescoes on the walls, depicting gods and heroes in triumphs and romantic dalliances, seem to mock your predicament, their idealized narratives contrasting sharply with your diminished reality. They tell tales of mighty deeds and great freedoms, while your own story is one of quiet subjugation, a life lived entirely on another's terms. You might even observe other household slaves, perhaps performing more strenuous tasks like grinding grain or hauling water, and wonder if their lot, despite its physical harshness, somehow offers more dignity than your own. At least their labor, however arduous, has a tangible, recognized purpose in the household's function, beyond simply existing for another's gratification. Their daily grind, while grueling, might feel less personally violating. The gentle rustle of olive leaves outside the window offers a fleeting moment of peace, quickly overshadowed by the ever-present awareness of your situation. A constant hum of powerlessness beneath the surface of daily life. As you continue your silent existence within the labyrinthine corridors of your patron's estate, you become acutely aware of the intricate web of power that defines your every interaction. Your patron, typically an older, aristocratic man, holds absolute sway over your life. He is your erased, the older, dominant partner in this arrangement, and you are his Arimenos, the younger, passive one. It was generally understood that these relationships, while often sexual, were framed in philosophical discourse as opportunities for the older man to impart wisdom and knowledge to the younger. However, the reality for a male concubine often fell far short of this idealized model. Instead of intellectual cultivation, your purpose was primarily one of service and gratification. A curious detail is that while Greek society openly acknowledged many forms of same-sex relationships, particularly the pedagogical ones, those involving concubines were often spoken of in hushed tones or veiled in euphemisms. This was unlike the more celebrated, often public, mentor-mentee pairings between free citizens, which were seen as contributing to the civic good. This subtle distinction highlights the underlying social discomfort with the concubine's status, a kind of collective turning away from its less savory aspects. Historians still argue whether the philosophical justifications for pederasty were genuinely believed by all, or if they sometimes served as a convenient intellectual veneer for more exploitative practices, allowing the elite to rationalize their desires. You might feel a flicker of cynicism, observing this hypocrisy from your silent vantage point. Your days are structured around your patron's whims. You might be summoned at any hour, day or night, to attend to his needs, which could range from the mundane to the deeply intimate. This could involve serving him food and drink, providing musical entertainment, or simply being present for his sexual gratification. There's a constant, pervasive pressure to anticipate his desires, to maintain a calm and agreeable demeanor, regardless of your internal turmoil. You learn to read the subtle shifts in his mood, the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible glint in his eye, the change in the tone of his voice. All these are crucial clues to what he expects of you next, and your immediate compliance is paramount. Your survival, in a very real sense, depends on your ability to remain pliable and obedient, a constant performance of submission. Imagine, for a moment, the emotional suppression required for this existence. You cannot express fear, anger, or sadness, at least not openly. Any uncalculated display of genuine emotion might be perceived as defiance, leading to swift and unpleasant consequences. Your true self, your hopes, your dreams, your cherished memories of a life before this servitude, must be carefully tucked away, hidden deep within. They are a secret garden no one else can visit. The luxurious fabrics around you, the rich scents of incense and perfume that fill the villa, are merely a gilded cage. You might be given fine clothing, perhaps even some small trinkets, but these are tokens of your servitude, not symbols of your freedom. They are a display for your patron's friends, a testament to his wealth, not a comfort for your soul. You are, in essence, a living ornament, a beautiful object, a testament to his power and his desires. The distant sounds of a flute, played by some free citizen in a nearby courtyard, remind you of a different kind of life, one filled with unburdened melody and spontaneous joy, a stark contrast to the silent symphony of your own constrained existence. The very air around you feels heavy with unspoken expectations, a constant pressure that never truly lifts. The hours within your patron's home stretch out, filled with a quiet routine dictated by his needs. You begin to understand that while a surface level of mentorship might be paid lip service by your patron, the practical application of it is often absent. You'll find that true educational guidance, encompassing intellectual and moral development, was typically reserved for young, freeborn males. Often within the context of the gymnasium or philosophical schools, your own education, if any, would be limited to practical skills or rudimentary literacy, just enough to fulfill your duties, but certainly not to elevate your social standing or grant you any form of independent thought. You are a tool, and tools need only enough knowledge to perform their function. A curious detail is that sometimes concubines were expected to possess certain artistic talents, like playing a musical instrument, singing, or reciting poetry. Imagine mastering the lyre not for the pure joy of music or for self-expression, but purely as another means to entertain your patron and his guests, to become another pleasing sound in the background of their lavish symposia. Your performances are not applauded for your artistry, but for how well they serve to enhance the atmosphere for the free men present. Historians still argue whether these acquired skills offered any real personal enrichment or merely served to enhance the concubine's market value or appeal to their patron, making them a more desirable possession. You might feel a dull ache in your fingers from practicing, not from passion, but from the relentless grip of obligation. Your daily routine often involves a strange mix of idleness and sudden demands. You might spend long stretches waiting, an invisible presence in the household, observing the comings and goings of slaves, family members, and visitors. You become a master of patience, existing in a state of suspended animation. Then, without warning, you're called upon. Perhaps your patron desires a massage, or wants you to recline beside him while he reads aloud, or expects you to join him in his private chambers. There is no predictability, no personal schedule you can truly call your own. Your body and your time are not yours. They are extensions of your patron's will, subject to his instantaneous desires, like a puppet responding to its master's unseen strings. You eat what you are given, sleep where you are told, and wear what is provided. Even the simplest pleasures, like a moment of quiet reflection in a shaded courtyard or a brief walk in the garden, are contingent on your patron's mood and his explicit permission. The grand architecture around you, the intricate mosaics underfoot, the sunlight filtering through the peristyle columns, all serve as a beautiful but constant reminder of your confinement. You are part of the scenery, a living, breathing decoration in this elaborate domestic theater. The sounds of distant laughter from the street, perhaps from free children playing, might drift in, a poignant reminder of the simple, unburdened freedom you've lost. You learn to make your face a mask, your movements precise and silent, becoming an expert in disappearing into the shadows, emerging only when commanded. It's a quiet, relentless erasure of your own self, a slow fading into the background of another's life. The sun continues its slow arc across the Athenian sky, and as the day wears on, you become acutely aware of the pervasive social stigma that clings to your very existence. While the practice of male concubinage was, in some ways, an open secret, among the elite, it was never a path to social honor or public acclaim. Quite the opposite. You'd feel the subtle, yet unmistakable, weight of disapproval from those considered respectable members of society. It's a key historical point that even in a society where same-sex relationships were not inherently taboo, the passive role in such a relationship for a free man was often seen as effeminate, and thus a profound mark of shame. This societal condemnation, more than any legal code, acted as an invisible cage, preventing any hope of genuine integration or respect. A curious detail you might observe is how even within the patron's household, the other, more traditionally, enslaved individuals might view you with a mixture of pity and a nuanced form of contempt. They, at least, perform recognized labor, whether in the fields, the workshops, or the kitchens. Their work, though arduous, had a defined purpose within the household economy. Your work, however, is intimate and often humiliating, reducing you to an object of pleasure, a personal indulgence that carries less societal validation. Historians still argue whether the deep-seated societal aversion to the passive male role contributed more to the concubines' misery than the actual legal limitations they faced, creating an internal and external landscape of disdain. You can feel the quiet judgment in every averted gaze, every dismissive glance, a constant whisper of your diminished standing. You are acutely aware that your relationship with your patron is not, and can never be, publicly acknowledged in any honorable way. You wouldn't be introduced as a partner in a civic setting, nor would your presence ever be celebrated in a formal gathering of free citizens. Instead, you exist in the shadows, a hidden, often unspoken, element of your patron's private life. If he entertains, you might be present to serve, to provide background entertainment, but never to sit as an equal or engage in intellectual discourse. You are a commodity, an extension of his private desires, rather than a person with inherent worth or recognized social identity. This distinction is paramount, always placing you outside the circle of valued individuals. Imagine the constant self-awareness of this low status. Every time you step outside the confines of the house, perhaps on an errand for your patron, you move with a subtle hunch, a guardedness in your eyes, a conscious effort to blend into the background. You learn to make yourself small, invisible to the casual passerby, lest their recognition bring further shame not only to you, but potentially to your patron. If he were to be associated too openly with such a stigmatized figure, the beautiful Greek sculptures you might glimpse in public spaces, celebrating the idealized male form in athletic and heroic poses, serve as a cruel contrast to your own diminished reality. You are not a warrior, not a philosopher, not a citizen. You are simply his. This constant sense of being less than is an insidious poison, slowly eroding any sense of self-worth you might once have possessed, leaving behind a hollow echo of your former self. The bustling sounds of the city, once a source of wonder, now seem to amplify your isolation, a loud reminder of the vibrant life from which you are fundamentally excluded. As your days unfold, the lack of any formal legal status becomes a suffocating reality. You are, effectively, without rights in a society that prides itself on its laws and civic structures. It's a cruel twist of fate that while ancient Greek law could be incredibly detailed and sophisticated, offering protections to citizens and even, to a limited extent, to some categories of slaves with specific roles, it offered almost none for a male concubine. If your patron chose to mistreat you, or even to inflict severe harm, you had virtually no recourse, no avenue for justice, and no hope of legal redress. Your existence was, in a legal sense, a blank page. A curious detail you might discover is that while harming a free person could carry severe penalties, sometimes even death in certain city-states, the same rules simply did not apply to you. Your body was not legally considered inviolable in the same way. You were not seen as a person in the legal sense that mattered for such protections, but rather as property, or at best, an appendage of your patron. Historians still argue whether this legal void was an oversight, a deliberate omission designed to maintain the absolute power of the patron and to prevent any challenge to the social order, or a simple reflection of a society that couldn't quite categorize you. You feel the cold dread of this reality, a constant awareness that your physical well-being is entirely at the mercy of another's whim. There's no one to appeal to, no magistrate to petition, no family to offer protection, for you are likely cut off from your own. Imagine a scenario where your patron, perhaps in a fit of pique or drunken rage during a symposium, strikes you. You might instinctively flinch, but you know better than to resist or even cry out too loudly. A bruised eye, a cut lip, or a broken tooth is simply something you endure, perhaps hiding it as best you can from others in the household, lest it displease your patron further. There would be no consequences for your patron, no legal repercussions, no public outcry. Your body, in essence, is not your own. It is an extension of his will, a plaything to be used and discarded as he sees fit. This absolute lack of legal recourse means you live in a constant state of apprehension, a perpetual fear of the unexpected. Every interaction with your patron, no matter how benign, carries an unspoken threat, a chilling reminder of his power and your utter helplessness. Even the smallest gestures of kindness from your patron, if they occur, serve only to highlight your dependence. A new tunic, a slightly larger portion of food during a meal, a moment of seemingly unguarded conversation. These aren't gestures of equality or genuine affection, but rather subtle reminders of who holds the strings. You are acutely aware that these meager comforts can be withdrawn at any moment, leaving you with absolutely nothing. Your perceived good fortune is merely a reflection of his momentary mood, or a calculation of his own convenience. The world outside the patron's villa might seem vibrant and alive with the sounds of commerce and the roar of public debate. But for you, those sounds are just distant echoes of a freedom you do not possess, a life lived by rules that do not apply to you. The soft glow of oil lamps begins to cast long, dancing shadows on the walls of your small quarters, and you find yourself wishing for the quiet oblivion of sleep, a brief escape from the day's anxieties and the ever-present threat of your vulnerable reality. As your days in this ancient Greek household unfold, the stark reality of your economic dependence becomes an undeniable, heavy burden. You possess nothing of your own. No land to cultivate, no trade to practice, no specialized skills that could genuinely earn you an independent living outside of your patron's household. Your very sustenance, your clothing, your shelter, all come directly from his generosity, or rather, his calculation of your utility. It's a foundational aspect of this historical period that economic autonomy was intrinsically linked to social freedom. Without the means to support yourself, you were inevitably beholden to another, utterly reliant on their continued provision. This dependency created a cage, invisible yet unbreakable, where your survival was dictated by a single will. A curious detail you might reflect on is how this reliance creates a peculiar kind of psychological trap, an invisible bond even stronger than physical chains. Even if your patron is not overtly cruel, the constant awareness that your well-being hinges entirely on his whim is debilitating. You are like a plant that can only grow with the precise amount of water and sunlight provided by its gardener. Too little, and you wither. Too much, and you drown in obligation. Historians still argue whether the economic leverage held by patrons was a more effective tool of control than outright physical coercion, subtly crushing the spirit without leaving visible marks, creating a deeper, more insidious form of servitude. You feel this silent, insidious pressure every moment, a constant gnawing at your sense of self-worth. Imagine the absolute lack of agency that defines your existence. If you dreamed of a different life, of learning a craft, or traveling to another city to seek your fortune, those dreams would quickly evaporate under the crushing weight of your circumstances. You cannot simply walk away. Where would you go? Who would take you in? Without financial means, without connections, without a recognized place in society, you would quickly face starvation, exposure, or be forced into an even more desperate and dangerous form of servitude, perhaps in a brothel or as a common laborer with no protections whatsoever. This complete reliance binds you to your patron as surely as any physical chain. You are an asset, a possession that requires upkeep, a means to an end, but a possession nonetheless, lacking self-ownership, even the food you eat, though it might be plentiful and of good quality if your patron is wealthy and desires to keep his property well maintained, comes with a silent price. Each morsel is a constant, humbling reminder of your dependency, a visible symbol of your lack of independence. The quiet clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the distant hum of daily life in the household, all serve to underscore your unique and isolated position within it. You are cared for, yes, your basic needs are met, but not out of love or genuine respect, but out of ownership and utility. This economic tether ensures that any fleeting thoughts of rebellion or escape remain just, that fleeting whispers in your mind, quickly extinguished by the cold, undeniable logic of survival. The evening shadows lengthen, wrapping the villa in a comforting dimness, but for you, it merely signals another night of quiet submission, another day in which your existence is not truly your own. As you continue to exist within this unspoken framework, you begin to grasp the profound absence of any institutional support for your role. Unlike recognized marriages, which were formalized by rituals and protected by law, or even the established, albeit harsh, legal frameworks surrounding various categories of slavery, male concubinage simply existed outside any formal protective structures. There were no temples where you could seek sanctuary for a grievance, no civic bodies to appeal to for justice, and no defined legal precedents that offered you even a sliver of recourse if you were wronged. This informal nature meant you were utterly exposed. A curious detail is that while Greek society had elaborate rituals and laws for almost every conceivable aspect of life, from religious ceremonies and athletic contests to property disputes and commercial contracts, your specific situation was a silent exception. It was as if your very existence in that role was a discrete arrangement, a private matter that the broader society chose not to formalize or regulate, thereby absolving itself of any responsibility towards you. Historians still argue whether this lack of formal structure made the concubines' position even more vulnerable, leaving them entirely at the mercy of individual patrons without any societal safety net to fall back on. You sense this profound isolation, a chilling understanding that no one, no institution would intervene on your behalf. Imagine the crushing feeling of being utterly alone. If your patron proved to be cruel, abusive, or simply decided to discard you, there was no official body to turn to for help. You couldn't seek medical attention for injuries without your patron's permission, nor could you appeal for food or shelter if cast out onto the streets. You were adrift, entirely dependent on the personal character of one man, a single individual's benevolence or caprice. This complete lack of a support system meant that any mistreatment, any abuse, any humiliation was endured in silence, behind closed doors, a private agony. Your suffering was largely invisible to the world outside the villa, a secret shame. even the whisper of hope for escape or a better life would be quickly stifled by this reality. Without a network of support, without legal standing, without economic means to sustain yourself, any attempt at flight would lead only to further destitution and danger, potentially forcing you into even more degrading circumstances. You are trapped not just by the physical walls of the villa, but by the impenetrable social and legal barriers that surround you, an inescapable prison of circumstance. The soft glow of the afternoon sun filtering through the courtyard trees highlights dust motes dancing in the air, a beautiful but fleeting reminder of the freedom of movement that is denied to you. This constant vulnerability, the knowledge that you are utterly exposed and without recourse, becomes a deep, unsettling, and pervasive part of your daily experience, a silent weight on your soul. The concept of marriage in ancient Greece, with its formal rituals, public pronouncements, and deeply embedded social recognition, stands in stark contrast to your own utterly unrecognized status. It's a crucial historical distinction that your position as a male concubine was emphatically not a substitute for marriage. While some relationships between an Erastes and Ereminos might have offered a form of companionship, particularly in philosophical circles, your specific role as a concubine never afforded you the social standing, the legal protections, the lineage, recognition, or the inheritance rights that came with being a spouse. Your relationship, no matter how long-standing or outwardly stable, was inherently private and unprotected in the eyes of the law and broader society. A curious detail here is that even the most celebrated philosophical discussions about relationships, including those between men, almost always implicitly or explicitly centered on the context of free citizens and their lineage. These dialogues were often concerned with the proper management of the oikos household and the continuation of the family line, which were paramount in Greek society. Your presence as a concubine existed entirely outside this formal framework. Historians still argue whether the lack of any official recognition for male concubinage was a way to maintain the rigid social hierarchy, ensuring that such relationships, even if common in practice, did not blur the sacred lines of legitimate family structures, citizenship, and property inheritance. You feel the weight of this invisible barrier, separating you from any true sense of belonging, permanence, or a recognized future. Imagine watching a wedding procession from the shadows, perhaps for your patron's daughter or a prominent neighbor's son. You see the bride, veiled and adorned, led through the streets, accompanied by joyous song and celebratory cheers. You witness the public feast, the offering of sacrifices, the symbolic joining of two families and their properties. All of it unfolds as a grand spectacle of legitimate social connection and the continuation of the polis. For you, it's a poignant, almost heartbreaking reminder of what you are denied. You can never stand in that position of honor, never have. Your union acknowledged by the community, never participate in the rituals that confer legitimacy. You can never raise children who would bear your name and inherit your social standing. For even if you fathered children, they would not be recognized as yours in the legal sense, belonging instead to their mother's household or a patron. Your relationships are, by their very nature, transient and ultimately disposable in the eyes of society. This absence of formal recognition extends beyond mere ceremony. It has profoundly practical and often devastating consequences. It means that if your patron were to die, you would likely be left with nothing. No claim to his estate, no legal provisions for your future, no family network to support you. You would be cast adrift, dependent entirely on the good graces of his heirs, if any, or forced to find another patron if you could, thereby perpetuating your cycle of vulnerability. This inherent instability, this constant threat of being rendered destitute and without purpose, is a constant gnawing anxiety that underpins your daily life. The sounds of everyday life, the distant hum of conversation, the ringing of hammers from artisans at work, all seem to underscore your profound isolation, your lack of roots in this complex social soil. The world continues around you, vibrant and full of intricate connections, but you remain an outsider, bound by unseen chains that prevent you from ever truly integrating. As you continue to exist within this unspoken framework, you begin to grasp the profound disconnect between the public perception of relationships and the quiet, often harsh reality of your own. Ancient Greek society, particularly among the elite, had a complex and often contradictory view of desire and partnership. While philosophical ideals might extol virtues and intellectual bonds in some male relationships, your situation as a concubine was rarely viewed through such a gilded lens. It's a significant historical observation that the very existence of male concubines often went unmentioned in formal texts, creating a silent consensus around a practice that was both common and simultaneously disdained. This historical silence speaks volumes, suggesting a societal discomfort that preferred not to scrutinize certain truths too closely, leaving individuals like you in a kind of limbo of non-recognition. You are there, undeniably present, yet your presence carries a weight of unspoken judgment. A curious detail you might notice is the subtle difference in how male concubines were perceived compared to female concubines. While both lacked the full rights of a spouse, female concubinage could sometimes carry a degree of practical acceptance, occasionally even bearing children who might be legitimized, thus securing a future, albeit one still without full spousal rights. For male concubines, however, the social stigma was often more pronounced, deeply rooted in notions of masculinity and the perception of the passive role as effeminate, and thus a mark of shame for free men. Historians still argue whether this difference in societal acceptance stemmed more from anxieties about male social roles, the preservation of lineage, or simply reflected different power dynamics inherent in each form of concubinage. You can feel the weight of this unspoken judgment even when no words are uttered. A palpable sense of being an outsider looking in on a world that doesn't quite acknowledge your full humanity. Imagine being present at a symposium, an evening gathering where men would recline, drink wine, and engage in philosophical debate or light-hearted conversation. You might be there to serve, to pour wine, to attend to the needs of your patron and his guests. The discourse around you might touch on concepts of beauty, love, and the ideal forms of relationships, perhaps even abstract discussions of eros. Yet, you are acutely aware that your own relationship, your very presence, exists in a shadow world that would never be openly celebrated or even truly acknowledged in such lofty discussions. You are a living testament to a reality they prefer not to scrutinize too closely, a silent figure in the background of their intellectual and social theater. The clinking of Kylix drinking cups, the aroma of rich foods, the vibrant discussions about civic duty and poetic verse. All these sensory details of a lively gathering only serve to emphasize your isolated position. A figure at the periphery, always present, but never truly part of the grand tapestry of free society. This gap between public ideal and private reality creates a peculiar kind of psychological burden. You learn to perform, to present a facade that matches the unspoken expectations of your role. You are a quiet observer, listening to conversations about honor and freedom, knowing full well that these concepts do not apply to you in any meaningful way. You internalize the message that your worth is tied to your utility, not to your inherent personhood. The very air seems to hum with this unspoken understanding. The soft glow of the oil lamps casts long dancing shadows, blurring the lines between what is seen and what is truly known, between the celebrated facade and the hidden, often painful, truth of lives like yours. The quiet hum of the night, usually a source of comfort, seems to echo your internal solitude. The days continue to pass, each one reinforcing the profound emotional vulnerability that permeates your existence. In a relationship where your worth is tied primarily to physical gratification and obedience, genuine emotional connection becomes a luxury you cannot afford, and one your patron may not even consider offering. It's an unfortunate aspect of this historical context that while ideals of companionship and deep platonic love were celebrated in ancient Greece, they rarely extended to those in your precarious position. Your feelings, your fears, your quiet longing for understanding and connection are, for the most part, simply irrelevant to the core function of your role. You learn to suppress them, to push them deep down, lest they betray your carefully constructed composure. A curious detail you might discover is that some philosophical schools, particularly those that emphasized self-control and detachment from earthly desires, might have inadvertently contributed to the patron's emotional distance. If the Erasts was taught to prioritize rational thought over emotional indulgence, your emotional needs would be even less likely to be considered. It was a common intellectual pursuit to master one's passions. Historians still argue whether this philosophical emphasis on stoicism and rationality, while noble in theory, inadvertently fostered emotional neglect in such power-imbalanced relationships, creating a cold detachment that dehumanized those in your position. You might feel a profound sense of loneliness, even when surrounded by the hustle and bustle of the household, a deep ache for connection that is never satisfied. Imagine a quiet evening, perhaps in your patron's private chambers. He might be engrossed in a scroll, or simply lost in thought, the flickering light from a single oil lamp illuminating the ancient script. You are present, a silent sentinel, perhaps refilling his wine cup or adjusting his cushion. In such moments of stillness, you might long for a kind word, a moment of genuine human connection that transcends the transactional nature of your bond. But such moments are rare, fleeting, and often fraught with risk. Any attempt on your part to seek emotional comfort, a comforting glance, or a soft touch, might be seen as an impertinence, a blurring of lines that your patron would quickly, and perhaps harshly, correct. You learn to temper your expectations, to extinguish any flicker of hope for true intimacy, conditioning yourself to emotional scarcity. This constant emotional deprivation leaves a deep and insidious mark. You become adept at self-preservation, at guarding your heart from further disappointment and pain. The luxurious surroundings, the fine food you might eat, the beautiful art that adorns the walls, all these material comforts seem hollow, and without meaning, without the warmth of genuine human connection. You are provided for, certainly, your basic physical needs met, but emotionally you are starved, living in a constant state of unfulfilled yearning. The distant sound of a harp playing a soft melody might evoke a fleeting memory of a different kind of life, one where feelings were acknowledged and perhaps even nurtured, a stark contrast to the emotional desert you now inhabit. This persistent sense of isolation, even in close proximity, becomes a defining feature of your quiet, constrained world, a silent scream within a gilded cage. The weight of your existence, you realize, is compounded by a profound lack of autonomy. Every aspect of your life, from the mundane to the deeply personal, is controlled by your patron. You cannot choose where you live, what you eat, or even how you spend your time. It's a core truth of this historical period that freedom meant self-governance, the ability to act according to one's own will, a concept utterly denied to those in your position. Your desires, your preferences, your very will are rendered irrelevant, subsumed by the will of another. You are, in essence, a living extension of your patron's domain. A curious detail here is that even some enslaved individuals, particularly those with specialized skills or in positions of significant trust within a household, might have gained a limited degree of informal autonomy. A slave managing a workshop or a trusted steward might have had certain managerial freedoms, perhaps even earning a pittance for their own use. But for a male concubine, the very nature of the role often precluded such freedoms. Your utility was tied intrinsically to your availability and compliance, not to your independent initiative or decision-making. Historians still argue whether this profound lack of personal agency was more psychologically damaging than any physical hardship, slowly eroding the individual's sense of self, leaving them feeling like a mere object rather than a person. You feel this internal erosion every day, a gradual diminishing of your own personhood. Imagine the simple desire to walk freely through the bustling streets of the city, to choose your own path, to linger at a market stall that catches your eye, to decide to visit a friend. These are fundamental freedoms you simply do not possess. If you leave the villa, it is only at your patron's explicit command, and typically under his watchful eye or that of his trusted servants. Your movements are circumscribed, your world confined to the boundaries he sets. There's a subtle but constant supervision, an invisible leash that keeps you tethered to his will. Always aware of the need to return, always aware of who you belong to. You are always aware of being observed, even when seemingly alone. fostering a pervasive sense of being perpetually accountable. This constant state of being controlled, of having no voice in your own destiny, creates a suffocating environment that slowly stifles your spirit. You might find yourself retreating further inward, nurturing a private world of thought that no one can touch, a small refuge for the parts of yourself that remain stubbornly your own. This internal sanctuary is a desperate attempt to retain some semblance of self in a world determined to erase it. But even this internal refuge is fragile, easily shattered by an unexpected summons or a harsh word, pulling you abruptly back into the reality of your servitude. The sounds of birds chirping freely outside the villa's walls, a simple symphony of unburdened life, serves as a poignant reminder of the unassailable liberty that is so casually denied to you. This constant suppression of your will, this pervasive lack of autonomy, becomes a defining, inescapable element of your quiet despair, a silent scream of the spirit. As the sun crests the midday sky, casting harsh shadows, you find yourself increasingly pressed into the role of entertainment within your patron's lavish symposia. These gatherings, a cornerstone of ancient Greek aristocratic life, were far more than mere dinner parties. They were intellectual salons, drinking bouts, and social showcases all rolled into one, designed to display the patron's wealth, taste, and intellectual prowess. Your presence, as a concubine, was often integral to the atmosphere, a living ornament. Alongside the music, wine, and witty conversation meant to enhance the experience for the free male guests. It's a fundamental aspect of historical understanding that the entertainment provided at these events was diverse, ranging from philosophical discourse and poetry recitation to more base forms of amusement and sexual gratification. A curious detail you might observe is how the lines between passive presence and active performance blur for you, making your role ambiguous and often taxing. You might be expected to recline quietly, listening intently to the debates, yet also ready at a moment's notice to fetch more wine, adjust cushions, or engage in private, often sexual conversations with guests if your patron so dictates. Sometimes, you might even be called upon to play the lyre, sing a song, or recite poetry, your talents becoming another facet of the evening's carefully orchestrated entertainment. Historians still argue whether this expectation to perform, even artistically, contributed to a perceived shred of dignity, allowing for some self-expression, or if it merely deepened the exploitation by making your person and talents entirely transactional, reducing them to mere services for hire. You feel the constant pressure to be on, to be agreeable, charming, and ever ready to please. Even when your soul aches with exhaustion or revulsion, imagine the scene. The room is filled with the boisterous laughter of wealthy, educated men, their voices rising and falling with the ebb and flow of discussion. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, fine wine, and perfumed oils, creating an intoxicating sensory experience for the attendees. Discussions range from the latest political intrigues and naval battles to abstract philosophical concepts about the nature of the cosmos and the ideal forms of government. You are there, physically present, perhaps even physically close to your patron, yet you are fundamentally an outsider to their world of intellect, power, and unburdened freedom. Your primary role is to enhance their pleasure and comfort, not to participate in their profound discourse as an equal. You might offer a witty remark or a knowing glance if you dare, but always with the underlying understanding that your contribution is for their amusement. A fleeting spark of entertainment, not for intellectual engagement or genuine contribution. To the conversation, this constant exposure to a world of privilege and freedom that is utterly denied to you creates a profound sense of irony and detachment. You serve the finest wines in exquisitely crafted vessels. Listen to the most profound thoughts articulated by sharp minds, and witness the unbridled camaraderie of free men, all while knowing you are merely a backdrop, a beautiful fixture in their elaborate stage production. The clinking of the drinking cups, the echoes of their laughter, the very warmth of the fire in the hearth, all these sensory details of a lively gathering only serve to amplify your quiet solitude and your inherent exclusion. You are a part of the spectacle, yet simultaneously removed from its true essence. Forever on the outside looking in, a silent, beautiful prop in their grand, boisterous drama, your own thoughts and feelings existing in a private, unspoken universe. Beyond the confines of Athens, your understanding of concubinage broadens, revealing the surprising diversity of ancient Greek city-states. While your Athenian experience has been one of subtle confinement and social invisibility, other regions held different, sometimes radically contrasting, views. Take Sparta, for instance. It's a fascinating historical point that Spartan society, renowned for its militaristic discipline, approached male relationships with a pragmatism that might surprise you. Here, same-sex bonds, particularly between older warriors and younger boys, were not only tolerated but actively encouraged, believed to foster camaraderie and martial prowess within the ranks. This was a direct contrast to the more nuanced and often condemnatory views found in other city-states like Athens. You might find yourself pondering the irony of a society known for its rigid discipline, also being more open about certain aspects of sexuality than its more enlightened neighbors. A curious detail is that in Sparta, these relationships were often seen as a form of rigorous mentorship, where the elder Erasts guided the younger Eromenos in physical training, military tactics, and the strict codes of Spartan citizenship. The sexual aspect, while present, was often framed within this pedagogical context, a means to an end for building fierce, loyal soldiers. There was a strong emphasis on the agoge, the rigorous Spartan upbringing, and these relationships were integrated into that system. Historians still argue whether the Spartan emphasis on the collective good and military strength truly transcended individual desires, genuinely sublimating them into a higher purpose, or if the idealization of these bonds simply served as a convenient justification to reinforce their unique societal structure and control over the populace. You might imagine the stark contrast. In Sparta, your youthful beauty might have been a means to military excellence and civic contribution, not just private pleasure or a display of wealth. Now contrast this with your Athenian reality, where, as you've experienced, the laws were quite different. You might recall the stricter Athenian laws, particularly those enacted to curb certain homosexual acts and sodomy. which was sometimes perceived as unnatural or taboo, especially if the free citizen took the passive role. These legal distinctions created a precarious existence for you, unlike the more open, if still formalized and purposeful, relationships in Sparta. You'd feel the constant anxiety of living under such laws, where certain acts, if performed with a free citizen outside the specific hidden bounds of your role as a concubine, could lead to severe penalties, even public shaming or loss of rights for the free person involved. This dual standard, where the patron might escape censure but the concubine was always vulnerable, was a cruel reality. This divergence between city-states highlights the fragmented nature of ancient Greece. There wasn't one unified Greek way of life, but a mosaic of customs, laws, and philosophies, often fiercely independent and sometimes contradictory. For someone in your position, this meant that merely crossing a border could shift the very definition of your existence. In Athens, you were largely hidden, a discrete part of a wealthy man's private life, existing in a gray area of social and legal ambiguity. In Sparta, a similar bond, albeit with different societal emphasis and purpose, might have been a public, if disciplined, part of life, woven into the very fabric of their military and educational system. You might even hear whispers of other regions, like Thebes, where the sacred band, an elite military unit composed of pairs of male lovers, was revered for its unmatched bravery and cohesion, suggesting yet another interpretation of male bonds. The quiet hum of the Athenian city, filled with its own specific rules and judgments, underscores the narrow confines of your particular reality. You are constantly reminded that your existence is contingent on these specific local customs and legal interpretations. The freedom to simply be yourself, or even to express genuine affection, is tightly bound by these invisible lines drawn. On the ancient map, the gentle breeze carries the scent of pine and distant sea, but it does little to dispel the heavy atmosphere of a life lived under the shadow of societal and legal constraints. Unique to your immediate surroundings, the serene backdrop of ancient Greece, with its marble temples and philosophical debates, often masks a grim underlying truth. For individuals like yourself, sexual assault and forced intercourse were pervasive realities, carried out with chilling impunity by those in power. It's a stark historical fact that while ancient Greek law could be severe for offenses against free citizens, particularly regarding their bodies and their honor, these protections simply did not extend to you, the male concubine. You existed in a legal blind spot, a shadowy zone where your consent was deemed utterly irrelevant and your body was considered a consumable commodity. This was not merely an oversight in their legal code. It was a deeply ingrained aspect of the power structures that governed your existence. A curious detail you might find particularly unsettling is the chilling double standard that existed. If a free citizen, especially a male citizen, were to be sexually assaulted or forced, it was considered a grave offense against their honor and their civic standing, often punishable by harsh fines, public shaming, or even death, as it represented a profound violation of their personal autonomy and status. Yet, for a concubine, such acts by a patron or his privileged guests were largely outside the purview of the law. you were considered to be in a state of perpetual minority, or non-personhood in this specific context. Historians still argue whether this legal vacuum was a deliberate mechanism to maintain the absolute power of the elite, allowing them unfettered access to those beneath them in the social hierarchy, or simply a reflection of a society that did not recognize your personhood in a way that warranted the same protective legal framework afforded to its citizens. You feel the cold dread of this reality, a constant, sickening awareness that your body is not your own and its use is dictated entirely by another's desire. Imagine the countless nights of fear and humiliation. You might be summoned to your patron's chambers, or even be exposed to his friends during a symposium, compelled to participate in acts that fill you with revulsion. There is no escape, no refusal that would not bring even harsher consequences. Your forced compliance is not just expected, it is demanded, a silent duty that is part of the unspoken contract of your existence. Any physical or emotional resistance would likely be met with further violence, or, at the very least, severe punishment that could range from public humiliation to outright physical harm, potentially even death. You learn to dissociate, to retreat into your mind, creating a mental fortress against the indignities your body endure, hoping to somehow detach your spirit from the physical pain. The whispers of the wind through the olive trees outside offer no comfort, only a soft, indifferent sigh, as if the very air itself is complicit in your suffering. This absolute lack of accountability for your abusers creates a profound and inescapable sense of helplessness. There is no one to tell, no authority to appeal to. The very society that built grand monuments to justice and reason, that celebrated the rule of law and the sanctity of the polis, turns a blind eye to your plight. You are a chattel, a tool for gratification, and your suffering is simply part of the unspoken cost of existing in such a vulnerable position within their social architecture. The grand pronouncements of virtue and liberty made by the philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, often heard echoing through the intellectual circles of Athens, seem like hollow, mocking echoes in the face of your personal reality. You carry the burden of these violations not just on your body, but deep within your spirit, a hidden wound that never truly heals, poisoning your perception of yourself and the world around you. The soft flicker of the oil lamp in your room seems to highlight the pervasive darkness that envelops your life, a reflection of your own inner turmoil and the despair that often creeps in during the quiet hours of the night. Despite the bleakness of your situation, you begin to observe the curious fluidity of status that could exist even for those in your vulnerable position. While your overall social standing was undeniably low, your individual experience was profoundly shaped by the wealth and social standing of your patron. It's a key historical insight that life for an enslaved person or a concubine was not a monolithic experience. A powerful, affluent patron could, at times, offer a surprising degree of material comfort and relative safety compared to a poorer, less influential one. This disparity meant that while the fundamental lack of freedom remained, the quality of your daily life could swing wildly based on the resources and temperament of the man who owned you. A curious detail here is that a particularly wealthy or well-regarded patron, an erased of considerable means and social influence, might provide you with more than just basic sustenance. You might receive better clothing made of finer fabrics, more palatable and diverse food, and perhaps even a private room, a small, quiet space that offered a modicum of privacy within the sprawling household. This private space, however small, could be an invaluable refuge from the constant scrutiny of other household members. Your physical safety, too, could be somewhat enhanced simply because your patron's reputation and influence might deter others from overt mistreatment or interference. With his property, historians still argue whether these occasional creature comforts were genuine acts of benevolence, a subtle form of possessiveness over a valuable asset, or simply a reflection of the patron's overall lavish lifestyle extending to all his possessions, including human ones. You feel the subtle difference. While still unfree, the quality of your captivity can vary greatly. A stark contrast to the dire circumstances of those under less affluent masters. Imagine being in the household of a truly prominent Athenian, perhaps a statesman, a celebrated general, or a renowned philosopher with extensive land holdings. The villa itself would be a testament to his power. Walls adorned with exquisite frescoes depicting myths or heroic deeds. The gardens lush and meticulously kept, filled with fragrant herbs and blooming flowers, and the food served at symposia would be the finest available, brought from distant lands. In such an environment, you might be dressed in finer tunics, perhaps even allowed to wear a modest piece of jewelry, a subtle badge of your patron's wealth rather than your own dignity. Your days might be less physically arduous, filled more with attending to your patron's intellectual or personal needs, fetching scrolls, preparing his bath, acting as a personal attendant, rather than heavy manual labor. You might even travel with him on his political or commercial journeys, seeing parts of the Greek world, like distant colonies or other city-states, that others in your position could only dream of. However, this comparative comfort is a gilded cage. Remember, it doesn't equate to freedom or dignity. The financial security you experience is entirely contingent on your patron's continued favor and prosperity. If his fortunes turned due to political upheaval or business failures, or if he simply grew tired of you and acquired a younger, more appealing concubine, that comfortable existence could vanish in an instant, leaving you utterly destitute and vulnerable. The quiet clinking of the water in the central fountain of the peristyle, usually a calming sound, now underscores the precariousness of your situation. You are keenly aware that your ease is merely a reflection of your patron's wealth, not an earned privilege or a sign of your own improved status, and it can be withdrawn as swiftly and arbitrarily as it was granted. This profound dependence means even comparative luxury comes with its own pervasive anxiety, a constant underlying fear of sudden loss and abandonment. As you navigate the subtle hierarchies of your patron's household and the broader Athenian society, you constantly encounter the concept of pederasty, an idealized form of relationship in ancient Greece that, while distinct from your own lived experience, often blurred the lines in disturbing ways. Pederasty, in its purest theoretical form, as discussed by philosophers like Plato and Xenophon, was understood as a pedagogical relationship between an older, free man, Erastes, and a younger, Free boy Ereminos, typically an adolescent. Its primary focus was on education, character building, and the transmission of civic virtues designed to cultivate future leaders and model citizens. While it often, though not universally, involved a sexual component, the intellectual and moral development was supposedly paramount. It's a crucial historical distinction that this was primarily a practice among citizens, intended to cultivate future leaders, not to exploit the vulnerable. A curious detail is that while many philosophical texts praised pederasty as a noble pursuit, emphasizing the Erastes' role as a mentor and the Eremenes' active pursuit of excellence and wisdom, the reality of male concubinage often inverted this ideal entirely. For you, the mentorship was superficial, if it existed at all, consisting more of instructions on service than intellectual guidance. Your excellence was judged primarily by your compliance, physical appeal, and ability to satisfy your patron's desires, not by your moral or intellectual growth. Historians still argue whether the philosophical ideal of pederasty served as a genuine aspiration for many Greeks, or if it was sometimes used as a convenient rhetorical device to legitimize or even romanticize inherent power imbalances, inadvertently contributing to the acceptance of exploitative relationships like yours by providing a veneer of intellectual respectability. You feel the sharp sting of this theoretical perfection clashing so violently with your harsh, transactional reality. Imagine overhearing a conversation during a symposium where your patron and his friends discuss the virtues of a young eremite. They know, perhaps a son of a fellow citizen. They praise his intelligence, his athletic prowess, and his promising future as a citizen. Speaking of love, eros being a pathway to wisdom, a means of shaping a young man into a responsible and virtuous member of the polis. They might wax lyrical about the beauty of the soul and its connection to physical beauty. You might serve them wine during this discussion, your presence unnoticed, as the profound irony washes over you. Your own relationship with your patron, while physically similar in some aspects to those described, lacks any such elevating or ennobling purpose. You are not being sculpted into a citizen. You are being consumed, your youth and body serving another's pleasure and status, without any reciprocal benefit to your character or future. This constant exposure to the idealized version of male relationships, while living the stark, utilitarian reality of your own, creates a profound sense of otherness and bitter disillusionment. You are not learning rhetoric or civic duties. You are learning obedience, subservience, and the art of self-effacement. The discussions of eros as a divine force, of love as a motivator for noble deeds and intellectual pursuit, seem utterly foreign to your own transactional existence, where your worth is measured only by your immediate usefulness. The sounds of the symposium, once a cacophony of voices, now seem to separate into distinct streams. The elevated discussions of the free, articulate citizens, and the silent, unspoken truth of your own personal servitude, a reality that exists just beneath the surface of their refined world. The moonlight filtering through the windows seems to illuminate this profound divide, casting you firmly into the shadows of the unacknowledged and the unideal. Beyond the philosophical ideals of pederasty, you confront the harsh reality of how male concubines were perceived in terms of their physical appearance and expected dress. Unlike the free eromenoi who might be admired for their athletic build or natural beauty, your aesthetic was carefully cultivated and controlled by your patron. It's a crucial historical point that your body was not entirely your own, but a part of your patron's display of wealth and taste, and therefore its presentation was rigorously managed. A curious detail here is that while free Greek men typically wore simple, practical tunics and cloaks, often favoring a more rugged or natural appearance, your attire might be more ornate or deliberately revealing. You might be dressed in softer, more brightly colored fabrics, perhaps with subtle adornments or perfumes that would be considered effeminate or ostentatious for a citizen. Historians still argue whether this distinctive dress was meant to enhance your appeal, to mark you as a luxury item, or to visibly differentiate you from free men, reinforcing your lower status. You feel the subtle discomfort of being adorned, knowing that each piece of fabric, each scent, is not for your comfort or self-expression, but for the pleasure and projection of your patron. Imagine standing silently in a room, perhaps at a symposium, dressed in a light, finely woven chiton that accentuates your form. Your hair might be styled, perhaps even perfumed, in a way that is distinctly different from the short, practical cuts of the free men around you. You are a living aesthetic, part of the visual and sensory experience for your patron and his guests. You are aware of their gazes, their quiet appraisals, and the way your appearance contributes to the atmosphere of luxury and indulgence. This constant awareness of being physically judged, of being reduced to an object of beauty or desire, is profoundly dehumanizing. This emphasis on your physical presentation means that even your body, your most personal possession, is not truly yours. It is maintained, groomed, and presented for another's consumption. You might be required to bathe frequently, to oil your skin, to maintain a youthful, unblemished appearance, all tasks that reinforce your objectification. The fleeting beauty of youth, which for a free man might lead to marriage and family, for you means continued servitude. The mirror reflects a carefully constructed image, but behind the eyes there's a silent resignation. The sounds of the symposium, once distant, now feel intensely close. The murmurs and laughter creating an oppressive atmosphere where your body is constantly on display. This meticulous control over your appearance underscores the profound lack of control you have over any aspect of your life. Beyond the philosophical ideals of pederasty, you confront the harsh reality of how male concubines were perceived in terms of their physical appearance and expected dress. Unlike the free Iramaya, who might be admired for their athletic build or natural beauty, your aesthetic was carefully cultivated and controlled by your patron. It's a crucial historical point that your body was not entirely your own, but a part of your patron's display of wealth and taste, and therefore its presentation was rigorously managed. This management extended to every detail, from the cut of your hair to the scent on your skin, transforming you into a curated object rather than a self-determining individual. A curious detail here is that while free Greek men typically wore simple, practical tunics and cloaks, often favoring a more rugged, austere, or natural appearance, that emphasize their citizenship and participation in military life. Your attire might be markedly different. You might be dressed in softer, more brightly colored fabrics, perhaps with subtle adornments or perfumes that would be considered effeminate or ostentatious for a citizen. This deliberate difference in dress served multiple purposes. It could enhance your appeal to your patron and his guests, mark you as a luxury item, and perhaps most importantly, visibly differentiate you from free men, reinforcing your lower, non-citizen status. Historians still argue whether this distinctive dress was primarily for aesthetic pleasure or for social demarcation. You feel the subtle discomfort of being adorned, knowing that each piece of fabric, each scent, is not for your comfort or self-expression, but for the pleasure and projection of your patron's identity and power. Imagine standing silently in a room, perhaps at a symposium, dressed in a light, finely woven chiton that drapes gracefully, subtly accentuating your form. Your hair might be styled in longer locks, perhaps even perfumed and intricately arranged, in a way that is distinctly different from the short, practical cuts favored by the free men around you. You are a living aesthetic, a part of the visual and sensory experience for your patron and his guests. You are acutely aware of their gazes, their quiet appraisals, the way their eyes linger, and the way your appearance contributes to the atmosphere of luxury, indulgence, and perhaps even exoticism. This constant awareness of being physically judged, of being reduced to an object of beauty or desire, is profoundly dehumanizing. Stripping away your inner self in favor of an outer facade, this emphasis on your physical presentation means that even your body, your most intimate and personal possession, is not truly yours to command or define. It is maintained, groomed, and presented for another's consumption and display. You might be required to bathe frequently, to oil your skin, to maintain a youthful, unblemished appearance. All tasks that reinforce your objectification and the idea that your primary value lies in your physical form. The fleeting beauty of youth, which for a free man might lead to honorable marriage and the establishment of a family, for you means continued servitude and vulnerability. The mirror reflects a carefully constructed image, a pleasing facade. But behind the eyes, there's a silent resignation, a deep weariness from the constant performance. The sounds of the symposium, once distant, now feel intensely close. The murmurs and laughter creating an oppressive atmosphere where your body is constantly on display, evaluated and consumed. This meticulous control over your appearance underscores the profound lack of control you have over any aspect of your life, from your inner thoughts to your very outward presentation. As you continue your silent life in the Athenian household, you become aware of an even more extreme and disturbing facet of male concubinage, the existence of the pure delicatus. While the term literally means delicate boy, it often referred to enslaved boys or young men who were specifically groomed from a very young age for sexual service and pleasure. These individuals represented the pinnacle of a patron's indulgent wealth and power. Their very existence, a stark testament to unchecked privilege and the commodification of human beings. It's a critical historical point that the younger the boy, the more desirable he sometimes was for this role, leading to even more profound exploitation. A curious detail here is that, Unlike concubines, who might have been acquired as adolescents or young adults, a pure delicatus was often taken into the household as a mere child. They were separated from their families at an age when their personalities were still forming, ensuring their complete dependence and malleability. Historians still argue about the precise extent of these practices and how widespread they were, but the literary and artistic evidence points to their undeniable presence among the very wealthy elite. You might witness a younger boy in the household, perhaps even younger than yourself, moving with an even greater sense of fragility and obedience, a chilling premonition of what his future might hold. The innocence in his eyes, slowly fading with each passing day, would be a painful sight. Imagine the psychological trauma inflicted upon such a child. Raised entirely within the confines of their patron's desires, their sense of self would be utterly warped. They wouldn't know a life free from constant scrutiny or the expectation of sexual service. Their education would be limited to pleasing their master, and their world would shrink to the boundaries of the household. They would be utterly robbed of a childhood, thrust into a premature adulthood defined by exploitation. The very concept of consent would be entirely alien to them, never having had the opportunity to develop personal boundaries or agency. Their laughter, if heard, might sound forced or strangely hollow, devoid of true childish joy. This systematic grooming from a tender age ensures a deeper, more insidious form of control. The pure deliquators would grow up knowing no other reality, making escape or resistance almost unthinkable. Their dependence, both economic and emotional, would be absolute. They might even develop a twisted form of attachment to their patron, a survival mechanism born of extreme vulnerability. The luxurious surroundings, meant to impress visitors, would for them be a constant reminder of their captivity, a golden cage that held their spirit prisoner. The sounds of the bustling city outside, full of the uninhibited cries of free children, would only serve to highlight the profound, irreversible loss of their own stolen youth and innocence, a silent tragedy unfolding within the seemingly idyllic walls of the villa. As you continue to observe the hidden lives within the wealthy Athenian household, a chilling and often disturbing practice comes into stark focus: castration. While not universal or always explicitly documented for every concubine, it was a known and horrifying reality for some, particularly those destined for long-term service as pori delicati or highly prized household servants. This irreversible physical alteration served multiple, brutal purposes: to preserve a youthful, unblemished appearance, to ensure perpetual docility, and to eliminate the possibility of sirring legitimate heirs, who might complicate inheritance or challenge a patron's authority. It's a critical historical point that this practice was primarily about maintaining control and enhancing a specific, often sexual, aesthetic, rather than for any medical reason. A curious detail here is that eunuchs, or castrated males, held a complex and sometimes paradoxical position in ancient societies, including parts of Greece, and more prominently in the Persian Empire, which influenced Greek practices. While they were physically mutilated, they could sometimes rise to positions of considerable power and trust within royal courts or wealthy households, precisely because they posed no threat to lineage and were seen as utterly loyal due to their complete dependence. However, for a concubine, castration was typically about maintaining their physical form and ensuring a perpetual submissive state. Historians still debate the prevalence of this practice, specifically for male concubines. In Athens, but its very possibility casts a long, dark shadow over your existence, a terrifying extreme of patriarchal control. You might encounter an older eunuch in the household, perhaps a trusted servant, whose smooth, youthful features betray the painful history of his past, a silent warning of what depths of control were possible. Imagine the sheer horror of such an ordeal, to have your body, your very essence of masculinity, irrevocably altered, not by choice, but by force. The physical pain would be immense, but the psychological and emotional trauma would be infinitely deeper. You would be stripped not only of your capacity for fatherhood, but also, in the eyes of society, of your full manhood, forever marked as other. This act of mutilation would serve as the ultimate expression of your patron's absolute power, a complete and total subjugation that leaves an indelible mark, both visible and invisible. Your identity would be fundamentally reshaped by this violation. This practice underscores the terrifying vulnerability of those in your position, highlighting the absolute lack of bodily autonomy. Your body is not simply used for gratification. It can be fundamentally reshaped to better serve the desires and anxieties of your patron. It is the ultimate act of commodification, reducing a human being to a manipulated object. The cool marble floors beneath your bare feet, usually solid and comforting, might suddenly feel cold and menacing, echoing the chill of this grim possibility. The sounds of daily life, the distant hum of the city, become muted, replaced by the terrifying whisper of fear, a constant awareness of the extreme lengths to which power could be asserted. This ultimate violation of the self, to be physically unmade for another's purpose, represents the absolute nadir of human dignity within. This ancient system, amidst the pervasive system of concubinage and the terrifying realities it entailed, you might, surprisingly, catch whispers of early attempts at legal regulation, though these were often limited and, crucially, not designed for your protection. Instead, these laws were primarily concerned with the preservation of citizen honor, the prevention of aristocratic scandal, and the proper maintenance of the social order, not the rights or well-being of the concubine. It's a key historical point that any legal discussions around male sexual relationships primarily focused on the active and passive roles taken by free citizens, and the potential for disgrace if a free man took a traditionally submissive role. Curious detail here is that Athenian law, for example, had provisions that could punish a free citizen who willingly submitted to sexual penetration by another free man, particularly if it implied an effeminate nature or a lack of self-control, which was seen as unbecoming of a citizen. Such an act could lead to atemia, a loss of civic rights, including the right to speak in the assembly or hold public office. However, these laws did not protect you, the concubine. In fact, your very existence, as someone who by definition occupied the passive role, was often implicitly acknowledged as outside the realm of honorable citizenship. Historians still argue whether these laws against effeminate behavior inadvertently pushed such practices further into the shadows, making the position of individuals like you even more vulnerable and less likely to be publicly acknowledged or regulated in a way that offered any safeguards. You feel the sharp irony. The laws protect those who exploit, not those who are exploited. Imagine overhearing a discussion among your patrons' guests about a recent legal case where a prominent citizen lost his rights for allegedly prostituting himself or taking a dishonorable sexual role. The discussions would be heated, focusing on the preservation of honor and the integrity of the citizen body. You, pouring their wine, would be a silent witness to their outrage, knowing that their indignation stems not from concern for the exploited individual, but for the perceived stain on the purity of their own ranks. Your own constant subjugation, the daily indignities you face, are entirely irrelevant to their concept of justice or moral order. These early regulations, therefore, offered no real hope for your betterment or freedom. They served to reinforce the existing power structures, clarifying who held power and whose bodies were considered valuable enough to be protected by law. They created a distinction between honorable and dishonorable sexual acts, but the criteria for this honor were always based on the status of the free male citizen. Your body, your role, and your experiences simply fell into the dishonorable category by default, without any consideration for your will or circumstances. The distant sounds of the Athenian assembly, where citizens debated laws that shaped their world, would be a constant reminder of the legal universe from which you were fundamentally excluded. A silent, voiceless entity caught in a web of rules not designed for your benefit, but for your subjugation. As your days unfold, the subtle, yet pervasive, burden of social humiliation becomes a constant companion. Unlike the overt shaming inflicted upon condemned criminals or publicly disgraced citizens, your humiliation is often unspoken, implied, and deeply internalized. It's a crucial historical point that while male concubinage was tolerated and practiced among the elite, it was never a path to social respectability or public recognition. Instead, it marked you, subtly but indelibly, as someone outside the honorable societal norms. A curious detail here is how this humiliation was often communicated through nonverbal cues. The averted gaze of a respectable citizen, the slight tightening of a matron's lips as she passes you, the dismissive tone used by household servants who, though also unfree, might perceive themselves as having a higher social standing due to their defined, non-sexual roles. Historians still argue whether this pervasive, internalized shame was more psychologically damaging than outright physical abuse, for some, slowly eroding the victim's sense of self-worth and identity. You feel this constant, subtle pressure, a quiet yet relentless reminder of your diminished status. Imagine attending to your patron during a public procession or a visit to the agora. You move a step behind him, your eyes cast down, your demeanor carefully subdued. You know that while your patron's presence commands respect, your own presence by his side, in this particular role, could invite whispers, knowing glances, or even silent judgment from others. You are a walking symbol of a private arrangement that, while common, was still considered outside the boundaries of dignified public life for free men. The very air around you seems to hum with this unspoken judgment, a collective societal disapproval that you are forced to absorb. This constant public and private dishonor creates a deep psychological wound. You learn to internalize the message that you are less than, that your worth is fundamentally tied to your utility and not to any inherent human dignity. The pride you might have once felt as a free boy, or the simple joy of unburdened existence, is slowly, painstakingly stripped away. You become a master of self-effacement, of making yourself invisible to avoid drawing attention to the very thing that brings you shame. The laughter of free children playing in the distance, their innocence unburdened by such societal strictures, seems a poignant contrast to your own heavy heart. This pervasive sense of humiliation becomes an ingrained part of your identity, a silent burden carried with every breath. The heavy weight of your reality, you now understand, is also defined by the almost insurmountable difficulties of escape. For a male concubine in ancient Greece, breaking free from your patron's control was a monumental, often impossible, task. You are not simply confined by physical walls. You are trapped by a complex web of legal, economic, and social barriers that are nearly impenetrable. It's a crucial historical point that unlike some forms of slavery where manumission, the act of being freed, was a recognized, though often rare, possibility, the path to freedom for a male concubine was far less defined and fraught with extreme peril. A curious detail here is that even if a male concubine managed to slip away from his patron's household, he would immediately face a myriad of challenges that made long-term freedom almost unsustainable. Without a family network to return to, as many were sold from distant regions or had their families disavowed them, without economic means, and without any recognized legal status, you would be a stateless, rootless individual. You would be vulnerable to being recaptured by your original patron who legally owned you, especially if you were a slave, or simply taken by another, more unscrupulous individual. Historians still argue whether the absence of clear legal pathways to freedom was a deliberate design to ensure total control, or simply a reflection of a society that couldn't conceive of a positive role for such individuals outside of their servitude. You feel the crushing despair of this reality, knowing that every path leads to another form of bondage. Imagine the fleeting thought of rebellion or escape that might occasionally flicker in your mind. You picture yourself slipping out under the cover of night, perhaps stealing a few coins and trying to disappear into the anonymity of the Athenian countryside or a distant port city. But then the cold logic of your situation sets in. Where would you go? Who would shelter you? Without money, you would starve. Without connections, you would be an easy target for bandits, or worse, captured and sold into even harsher servitude, perhaps in the mines, or as a common laborer, where life expectancy was brutally short. The fear of recapture and the severe punishment that would inevitably follow acts as a powerful deterrent, binding you more effectively than any chain. This almost complete lack of viable escape routes means you are forced into a position of resigned acceptance. Your life is not your own to shape or choose. The very notion of self-determination, so celebrated among the free citizens of Athens, is a cruel joke for you. You learn to suppress any longing for liberty, to extinguish the embers of hope, because nurturing them only leads to deeper pain. The sounds of distant travelers on the road, their laughter echoing in the night, are a poignant reminder of the expansive world beyond your reach, a world that offers no refuge for someone like you. Your dreams of freedom are just that, dreams fading into the cold, stark reality of your perpetual confinement. The cumulative weight of your experiences, the constant subjugation, the lack of rights, and the pervasive social stigma begins to manifest as a deep, insidious, internalized shame. It's a psychological burden far heavier than any physical task, a silent poison that slowly erodes your sense of self-worth and identity. You begin to see yourself through the eyes of your oppressors and the disapproving society around you, internalizing the belief that your existence is inherently dishonorable and that you are less than a complete human being. This is a critical historical point, as psychological impacts of such widespread sanctioned exploitation are often overlooked in historical accounts. A curious detail here is how this internalized shame can lead to a kind of self-policing. You might unconsciously adopt the very behaviors and attitudes that society expects of you as a concubine, believing them to be your true nature. You might become overly deferential, avoid eye contact, speak softly, and suppress any spontaneous displays of emotion or opinion, not just out of fear of punishment, but because you genuinely believe such expressions are not allowed for someone like you. Historians still argue whether this internalization was a survival mechanism that protected the individual from further pain by dulling their self-perception, or if it was the ultimate victory of the oppressive system, making the victim complicit in their own dehumanization. You feel this subtle shift within yourself, a gradual extinguishing of your own vibrant spirit. Imagine catching your reflection in a polished bronze mirror or a still pool of water. Instead of seeing a person with hopes, dreams, and a unique personality, you might begin to see what your patron sees: a beautiful object, a compliant servant, a vessel for another's desires. The youthful features that once held promise now seem to be merely tools of your captivity. The very idea of personal agency, of having desires that are truly your own and worthy of pursuit, becomes a distant, almost forgotten memory. You might even find yourself agreeing with the societal judgment, believing that your current state is somehow unnatural or deserved, consequence of your past or your birth. This constant internal battle, this struggle against a self-perception imposed by others, is profoundly isolating. You cannot share this inner turmoil with anyone for fear of appearing ungrateful, rebellious, or simply mad. So, you carry this shame alone, a silent companion that whispers insidious doubts into your mind day and night. The warmth of the sun on your skin, the beauty of the Athenian landscape, the simple pleasures of life, all seem muted and dulled by this pervasive sense of unworthiness. You become a ghost in your own life, existing physically but diminishing internally, a profound and tragic consequence of your position. This internalized shame cements your captivity, not just within the villa, but within the very confines of your own mind. As the centuries passed and the glory of ancient Greece began to wane, new philosophical and religious currents emerged that would profoundly impact the social landscape, including, albeit slowly, the practice of concubinage. The most significant of these was the rise of Christianity. While it would take centuries for its influence to fully permeate society, the core tenets of early Christian thought, with their emphasis on spiritual equality, the sanctity of individual life, and a more restrictive view of sexual morality, began to chip away at the long-standing pagan practices that had normalized concubine. It's a crucial historical turning point that these new moral frameworks, even if initially applied imperfectly, challenged the very foundations of practices like yours. A curious detail here is that early Christian teachings, while advocating for a stricter sexual ethic overall, often condemned all non-marital sexual relationships, including those involving concubines, whether male or female. This was a radical departure from the more fluid and often permissive sexual mores of pagan Greece and Rome. While not immediately leading to widespread abolition, these condemnations gradually shifted public opinion and legal frameworks, pushing practices like male concubinage further into the realm of the illicit and sinful. Historians still argue whether the Christian emphasis on the spiritual rather than the physical, and the notion of a universal moral law, genuinely improved the lot of the exploited, or simply replaced one form of subjugation with another, albeit with different justifications. You might imagine the faint whispers of this new faith, initially dismissed as strange, slowly growing into a roar that would reshape the world around you. Imagine a future where the grand temples of Zeus and Athena, so central to Athenian life, begin to stand empty, their statues draped or removed, replaced by smaller, simpler Christian churches. You might hear missionaries speaking of a God who sees all souls as equal in his eyes, regardless of social status or origin. This concept, so utterly alien to the hierarchical society you inhabit, would be revolutionary, almost unfathomable. While this nascent Christianity would have its own forms of intolerance and social control, its condemnation of practices rooted in sexual exploitation, particularly of the vulnerable, would eventually erode the social acceptance that had allowed concubinage to flourish. This new moral compass, however slowly, began to dismantle the ideological underpinnings that had justified your existence. The idea that all individuals possessed an inherent spiritual worth, even those considered property or objects of desire, was a powerful, if often hypocritical, challenge to the ancient order. The very ground beneath the feet of your patrons would begin to subtly shift, as the foundations of their unquestioned dominance were questioned by a burgeoning moral authority. The sounds of pagan festivals, once vibrant and all-encompassing, would gradually be replaced by the quiet chanting of Christian hymns, signaling a new era with different, though perhaps not immediately kinder, rules. Your fate, though still precarious, would become entwined with these sweeping societal transformations, hinting at a distant future where such practices might eventually become obsolete. The inexorable march of time, coupled with the profound cultural and religious shifts ushered in by Christianity, ultimately led to the decline of male concubinage in the ancient world. This wasn't an overnight revolution, but a slow, gradual process spanning centuries, as new legal codes, moral frameworks, and social sensibilities took root. The practices that had defined your existence, once openly tolerated or implicitly accepted, slowly faded into disrepute, eventually becoming condemned and, in many regions, outlawed. It's a crucial historical development that reflects a significant transformation in Western societal views on sexuality, individual rights, and the treatment of vulnerable populations. A curious detail here is that the decline wasn't solely due to Christian morality. Economic changes also played a role. As the Roman Empire, which had absorbed Greece, began to face internal strife and external pressures, the large, slave-based households, which facilitated practices like concubinage, became less common. The shift towards more localized, agrarian economies and later, feudal systems altered the dynamics of household labor and personal relationships. Moreover, evolving ideas about family, inheritance, and the role of the individual within society contributed to the slow erosion of practices that had once been commonplace. Historians still debate which factor, religious, economic, or social, played the most dominant role in the eventual demise of formalized male concubinage. You might imagine the world around you subtly but surely changing, a slow creaking of the old order giving way to something new, if not always entirely better. Imagine a future where the notion of a man keeping another man as a concubine would be met not with quiet acceptance, but with widespread condemnation, even legal prosecution. The very idea that a free person could be forced into such a role would become unthinkable, a barbaric relic of a bygone era. The language itself would shift. Terms like catamite would become historical curiosities, imbued with a sense of past injustice rather than current reality. The grand villas that once housed such arrangements would either fall into ruin or be repurposed, their walls no longer echoing the silent suffering of those within. This slow but undeniable societal evolution offers a bittersweet perspective. While you, in your historical reality, might never experience this freedom, the knowledge that such practices would eventually be relegated to the dustbin of history provides a flicker of posthumous vindication. The relentless pressures of emerging moralities and changing social structures would eventually render your particular form of servitude obsolete. The distant sounds of the changing world, perhaps the tolling of a church bell replacing the old, temple drums signify not just a new religion, but a different kind of human society beginning to take shape. One that, however imperfectly, would eventually strive for different ideals regarding human dignity and autonomy. Your suffering, though, real and profound, would become a testament to a time that ultimately, and thankfully, passed. As the centuries truly roll on, and the dust of ancient Greece settles into the annals of history, you gain the ability to look back and reflect on the lasting legacy of male concubinage. It is a legacy marked by pain, exploitation, and the profound dehumanization of individuals, a stark counterpoint to the celebrated intellectual and artistic achievements of the era. This practice left deep, invisible scars on the individuals caught within its grasp, scars that resonated through generations, even as the specific practice faded into obscurity. It's a crucial historical understanding that while societies evolve, The human cost of their institutions, particularly those that deny fundamental rights, remains a powerful and enduring lesson. A curious detail here is how the historical silence surrounding male concubinage contributed to its lasting impact. Because it was often unacknowledged in formal legal or philosophical texts, its reality was left largely to be inferred from indirect evidence, pottery, fragmented poems, and legal speeches that hinted its existence without explicitly detailing the lives of those involved. This lack of explicit historical record means that the voices of those who suffered are largely unheard, their experiences relegated to the realm of conjecture rather than direct testimony. Historians continue to piece together this painful past, attempting to give voice to the voiceless. You might feel a sense of profound injustice, knowing that your story and the stories of countless others like you have been largely erased from the celebrated narrative of this powerful civilization. Imagine trying to explain your life to someone from a truly free future. How would you convey the subtle terror of economic dependence, the chilling impunity of abuse, the soul-crushing weight of social stigma, the very concepts of consent and bodily autonomy, so fundamental to modern understanding of human rights, was simply not applied to you? Your existence was defined by their absence. The beauty of the temples, the profundity of the philosophies, the democratic ideals, all these achievements would seem tainted, shadowed by the systemic exploitation that underpinned so much of the society. You would highlight the paradox, a civilization that prized freedom and reason, yet simultaneously sanctioned profound unfreedom and irrational cruelty towards segments of its own population. This reflection offers a unique, albeit painful, perspective on human history. It teaches us about the complexities of power, the fragility of rights, and the enduring human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. The lingering shadows of male concubinage serve as a stark reminder that progress is rarely linear, and that, even in seemingly enlightened societies, profound injustices can flourish when unchecked power and social prejudice combine. Your final thought might be a quiet hope that by unearthing and understanding these difficult truths, future generations can better recognize the subtle forms of exploitation that might still exist in their own times, ensuring that such indignities are never again normalized. The wind whispers through the ancient ruins, carrying with it the echoes of untold stories, urging remembrance and vigilance. As the final grains of sand fall through the hourglass of ancient Greek history, you are left with a profound and somber reflection on your journey. You have walked in the silent footsteps of a male concubine, experiencing a life defined by profound vulnerability, relentless exploitation, and a constant struggle against a society that denied your basic humanity. This wasn't a romanticized tale of ancient passion, but a stark, often brutal, reality of power imbalances and systemic dehumanization. Your journey through this historical reality has illuminated the stark contrast between the lofty ideals often celebrated in ancient Greece, democracy, philosophy, art, and the grim, lived experiences of those who existed at its very margins. A curious detail that lingers in your mind is how the very subtlety of this form of exploitation made it particularly insidious. It wasn't always the overt brutality of the mines or the physical chains of a galley slave. Instead, it was the pervasive lack of autonomy, the constant emotional invalidation, the quiet stripping away of dignity, and the ever-present threat of abuse without recourse. This psychological warfare, the constant erosion of self, perhaps left wounds more profound than physical scars. Historians continue to grapple with the complexities of this hidden history, trying to understand not just what happened, but how. A society could justify such practices while simultaneously aspiring to such heights of intellectual and civic achievement. You are left with the chilling understanding of how easily human dignity can be compromised when power is unchecked and certain lives are deemed less valuable. Imagine the quiet resilience required to endure such a life day after day. The small, internal victories, a moment of peace, a fleeting thought of defiance, the ability to maintain a hidden core of self amid the overwhelming pressure to conform. These were not grand acts of rebellion, but vital strategies for psychological survival. You might ponder the inherent strength of the human spirit, even when subjected to the most crushing circumstances. The whispers of the wind through the ancient olive groves, the distant murmur of the Aegean Sea, now seem to carry not just the sounds of a lost world, but the echoes of countless unspoken stories, each a testament to endurance. Your final thoughts are not of bitterness, but of a quiet, enduring lesson. The legacy of male concubinage in ancient Greece serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing and safeguarding the rights of all individuals, regardless of their social standing, gender, or perceived utility. It underscores the danger of unchecked power and the insidious nature of systems that deny agency and personhood. The beauty of ancient Greece is undeniable, but so too is its shadow side. By confronting these difficult truths, we gain a deeper, more nuanced understanding of humanity's past, and perhaps a greater resolve to build a future where such systemic exploitation becomes truly impossible. The sun sets on this ancient world, leaving behind a profound stillness and a silent plea for remembrance and vigilance.